Imagine a time when the land that now houses one of the world's greatest cities was nothing more than a muddy village, nestled along the banks of a great river. Picture the daily rhythms of life: no grand buildings, no bustling streets, no iconic landmarks like the Tower of London or Big Ben. Instead, there were simple huts, thatched roofs, and the soft sound of the wind across the Thames. This is where our story begins, the humble origins of what would become London, the city that would rise to dominate the world. But how did this small village transform into one of the largest and most influential cities on the planet? The journey of London is not simply a tale of bricks and mortar, but of people and their resilience, their struggles, and their ambitions. It's the story of how the Romans, the Anglo-Saxons, the Vikings, and the Normans all came to shape this land, slowly transforming it into the urban powerhouse we know today. In the early days, life in what would become London was difficult and uncertain. The early settlers, mostly Celts, lived in small, tight-knit communities, surrounded by dense forests and wild terrain. The river, the Thames, was both a lifeline and a barrier. For centuries, the people of this land lived without much contact with the outside world. But everything changed when the Romans arrived, bringing with them new ideas, new ways of living, and new technologies. As the city grew, so did the lives of its people. The transition from a quiet, rural village to a bustling town involved challenges, hardships, and drastic shifts in how people lived. It wasn't just about building houses or roads, it was about building society, forging an identity, and overcoming the fears of change. Before we dive deeper into the rich tapestry of London's growth, let's take a moment to reflect on the early people of this land. What was it like to live in those early days? How did the people survive in a time when there were no machines, no electricity, and no modern comforts? The early inhabitants of this area had to be resourceful, resilient, and deeply connected to their environment. But before we get into the history of Roman invaders and the rise of London town, let me ask you. Where are you listening from tonight? Are you nestled in the comfort of your home, or perhaps on a long journey? I'm always curious to know where in the world my viewers are tuning in from. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's fascinating to see how far this journey of London's history stretches. And here's another question for you. If you could travel back in time to those early days of London, would you rather experience the Roman occupation, the Viking invasions, or perhaps the Anglo-Saxon rise? Comment below with your choice. I would love to hear your thoughts and discuss how different each era must have felt for the people living there. Let's take a step back in time, to when London was nothing more than a Celtic village named Londinium, a small, quiet settlement situated by the river, surrounded by forests and unsettled land. The very name of London is a mystery. It is believed to be derived from the ancient Celtic word, possibly meaning the place belonging to the tribe of the Londinios, or, as some believe, it could have been named after a leader or local tribe. At this time, around 50 BCE, there were no great walls or structures. Just a few wooden huts, Paleolithic tools, and humble beginnings. The people relied heavily on the land and river for their survival, fishing for food from the Thames and hunting wild game in the surrounding forests. Life was simple, but it was also hard. The threat of tribal wars, harsh winters, and disease were constant companions. When the Romans arrived in 43 AD, they saw the potential of this small settlement and made it the center of their empire in Britain. They built the first Roman Londinium, transforming the village into a fortified town with grand Roman baths, temples, and wide stone-paved roads. The building of Londinium marked a dramatic shift from the quiet life of small villages to a bustling town where commerce, trade, and military presence all converged. For the Celtic tribes, the Roman occupation was a time of subjugation and adaptation. Many were forced to conform to the new way of life, while others resisted the changes. Roman law, architecture, and language began to permeate the local culture, altering everything from food and clothing to social structures. The once small settlement began to grow, not just physically, but also socially. The people of Londinium found themselves living in a Roman city that was linked to the greater Roman Empire through trade routes that stretched far beyond the British Isles. At first glance, life in Roman Londinium must have been vastly different from the lives of the Celts who once lived in the region. The Romans built aqueducts, installed sewers, and paved streets with stone, luxuries that the Celts had never seen. Yet, for the local people, these advances weren't just conveniences, they were signs of the Romans' authority and control over the land. Imagine the confusion, fear, and awe that must have been felt by the Celtic tribes as the Romans began to transform their environment. The newly established Roman soldiers built their barracks near the settlement, and the first Roman baths appeared. These baths, often decorated with beautiful mosaics and sculptures, became an integral part of Roman life, places for people to socialize, bathe, and relax. For the locals, however, this might have felt like an invasion of not just their land, but also their customs and traditions. The Roman occupation brought a new kind of life to Londinium. People who once lived in small rural villages began to experience a city-like existence, with markets, public baths, and theaters. The streets began to hum with life as traders from Rome and other parts of the empire brought goods and spices, making the town a hub for commerce and culture. But it wasn't all luxury. The local people were taxed heavily, and many resented the changes that the Romans imposed on their lives. The Roman Londinium grew into a thriving community. The ancient London Wall was built, marking the limits of the growing town. Trade flourished, and Londinium became an important port for the Roman Empire, acting as a conduit for goods that flowed in and out of Britain. As time passed, the city became a blend of Roman and local Celtic traditions. But even as the Roman Empire declined in the 5th century, the legacy of Roman Londinium remained. The Romans had brought new ways of life, and while the Anglo-Saxons would come to dominate the area, the foundation of Roman London would endure. This is just the beginning of the story. From Roman Londinium to the rise of Anglo-Saxon London, Viking invasions, and the eventual development of the city into the global metropolis we know today, London's story is one of constant evolution. The challenges of war, plague, and conquest shaped the lives of its people, but so too did the ambitions, innovations, and dreams of those who called this land their home. As we continue, we'll explore how London evolved through the medieval era, the influence of the Normans, and the rise of the British Empire. But for now, let us reflect on this early period, when London was nothing more than a village, a place of survival, adaptation, and transformation. Before we move forward, tell me, if you were living in Roman Londinium, what part of your life would be the most different? Would you have embraced the Roman way of life, or would you have resisted their rule? Comment below. I love to hear your thoughts. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into London's history, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about how cities became the titans they are today. As the Celtic village of Londinium slowly gave way to the strategic vision of the Romans, the land along the Thames began its transformation. Imagine, for a moment, that you are standing on the banks of the river, watching as the Roman legions march across what was once a village of huts and wooden palisades. The river, life-giving yet dangerous, is now the lifeline of a city destined to become more than just a humble settlement. It will become a thriving Roman city. The Romans had an incredible talent for urban planning, and their arrival marked a turning point for the settlement of Londinium. Before the Romans, this land was known as a tribal territory of the Celtic Parisii, a people who were familiar with the rhythms of the land, but not yet with the grandeur and complexity of urban life. For them, the land was wild, untamed, and ruled by natural cycles. Then came the Romans, bringing with them a new sense of order and purpose, transforming this sleepy village into a global hub. The Roman Empire, expansive and ever-reaching, saw London's strategic position by the Thames and its proximity to the Mediterranean trade routes as a crucial point for expanding their empire. The Romans were masters of infrastructure. They were engineers, architects, and organizers, and their goal was not just to conquer but to civilize. As a result, Londinium transformed from a humble Celtic settlement into a burgeoning Roman urban center. In 43 AD, Emperor Claudius led the Roman forces across the English Channel to Britannia. The Romans first encountered the Celtic tribes, who were divided and often warring amongst themselves. The Roman strategy was simple but effective: conquer, fortify, and bring order. The area around the Thames became a key point for Roman expansion, and the settlement now known as Londinium was born. The city was strategically located, making it an ideal point for trade and defense. The Romans quickly saw its potential and began to build a city that would serve as an essential hub for Roman influence in Britain. The Roman plan was systematic. Fortifications, roads, marketplaces, and public buildings were erected to establish a city in the Roman fashion. Roman engineers began laying down paved roads and building stone walls, marking the beginning of London's transformation from a tribal settlement to a city of power. At first, Londinium was not much more than a military outpost, a fort and its surrounding market, built to house the Romans stationed in Britain. However, the Romans had a habit of establishing their cities with both military and economic purposes in mind. They built a river port and marketplaces where goods could be traded with the larger Roman Empire, and the town began to thrive. Life for the local Britons in the early days of Roman occupation was radically different from what they had known before. The arrival of the Romans brought many changes to the Celtic way of life, both good and bad. For the people of Londinium, it was not just a matter of seeing their village grow, they were now living under Roman rule, and that meant new ways of life, new laws, and a new set of expectations. Roman life, though often luxurious, was also demanding. The inhabitants of Londinium were expected to conform to Roman cultural norms, and this meant adopting Roman dress, speaking Latin, and following Roman laws. The population of Londinium began to integrate Roman culture into their lives, blending their Celtic roots with the Roman system. For many of the local Celtic people, the arrival of the Romans wasn't simply a matter of growth and progress, it was a displacement of their culture and a reordering of their world. Roman soldiers occupied much of the land, and the town became more militarized. The imposing Roman structures began to dominate the landscape, while the Celtic villages on the outskirts of Londinium were gradually absorbed into the growing city. Despite these changes, the Romans also brought benefits to the city. The Romans introduced new technologies, aqueducts, stone buildings, and sewers, which allowed Londinium to grow beyond its humble beginnings. The Roman presence also led to an explosion in trade. Roman towns were connected through a vast network of roads, allowing goods to flow freely through the city, turning it into a key trading post. Roman coins began circulating, and Londinium began to grow as a commercial hub, attracting people from across the empire. One of the most striking changes brought by the Romans was their architecture. Whereas the early Celtic structures were made of wood and mud, the Romans brought stone, marble, and bricks. Public baths, temples, and amphitheaters were among the first grand buildings to rise in the city, signaling the power of the Roman Empire. These buildings weren't just for function, they were designed to impress. The Roman Forum was established as a central meeting place in Londinium. It was where people could meet to discuss trade, politics, and everyday life. The Roman baths became places of both relaxation and socialization, offering people the opportunity to cleanse themselves while discussing business or the latest political gossip. The London Wall, which would eventually be built around the city, was also a major milestone in Londinium's development. It was a defensive structure, meant to protect the city from both invaders and internal unrest. This stone wall, constructed over time, became a symbol of Roman authority in the area. Even after the Roman departure, the remnants of these fortifications would continue to define the city for centuries to come. Over the decades, Londinium began to evolve into a city of contrasts. While Roman influence was visible in its infrastructure, there was still a significant Celtic presence in the daily life of the city. As the settlement grew, it became a blend of Roman civilization and Celtic traditions. The local Britons adopted Roman customs, while the Romans began to incorporate Celtic customs into their daily life. This cultural integration was not just limited to customs but extended to the city's religion and art. The Romans introduced the worship of Roman gods, but many of the local Britons continued to honor their Celtic deities, leading to a syncretism of beliefs. Temples to Roman gods were built side by side with sacred Celtic sites, creating a unique religious fusion in Londinium. Over time, the city began to mirror the diverse and multi-layered nature of Roman society, where different cultural groups coexisted and thrived, albeit under Roman rule. However, as the centuries passed, the Roman Empire began to lose its grip on Britannia. By the early 5th century AD, the Romans had withdrawn from Britain, leaving the city of Londinium vulnerable to attack and eventual decline. The Roman structures were abandoned, and many of the Romanized Britons fled to the countryside, seeking safety from Viking invasions and the collapse of central authority. The once grand city that had been at the heart of Roman Britannia fell into disrepair, its impressive structures slowly deteriorating. But the story of London was far from over. This city would continue to evolve, rise, and eventually become a pivotal center of both medieval England and global influence. When the Roman legions abandoned Britain in the early 5th century AD, they left behind a civilization that was no longer in control of its destiny. The grand structures, the busy streets, and the mighty city of Londinium began to crumble into the shadows of history. With their departure, the people of Britain, now cut off from the empire, faced a new reality. They had to survive on their own, amidst a world of uncertainty and chaos. The Anglo-Saxons arrived on the shores of Britannia, beginning their settlement and domination of the land. In the wake of Roman influence, the city of Londinium faced a time of decline, its streets empty, its buildings in disrepair, and its fortifications no longer able to protect the city from external threats. Yet, as the Anglo-Saxons sought to rebuild, the heart of London began to stir once more, gradually evolving into the beginnings of the medieval city we would eventually recognize. The challenge of invaders, raids, and a lack of central authority created an environment ripe for new power struggles. But even in this period of uncertainty, London began to show its resilience, and new forces, most notably the Vikings, would come to shape its future in ways no one could have predicted. After the Romans left, Britain was thrown into a period of chaos and fragmentation. The Anglo-Saxons, a group of tribal warriors from what is now Germany, Denmark, and Holland, began migrating across the sea to Britain. They initially settled along the east coast, where they founded small kingdoms that would later become the backbone of England. London, however, would remain in a state of abandonment for a time, its once great Roman roads and walls left in ruins, as the Anglo-Saxons didn't initially see it as a strategic hub. As the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms grew in power, London slowly began to regain its relevance. The city became a key point of trade and defense, re-emerging as a focal point for the Kingdom of Essex, which briefly controlled the area. By the 7th century, London was again becoming a site of political and economic importance. Unlike the Romans, the Anglo-Saxons didn't build in the grand Roman style. They favored more modest timber buildings, huts, and wooden fortifications. This change in architecture signaled a new era for the city, one that emphasized local craftsmanship over the imperial grandeur that defined the Roman age. Yet, despite this shift in physical form, the city began to mirror the Anglo-Saxon approach to urban life. New churches were built, including the St. Paul's Cathedral, the first of many iterations, and London became an important Christian center as it was Christianized during the reign of King Ethelbert of Kent in 597. Churches became central gathering points for the people, as Christianity began to spread throughout the land. Education, literature, and law began to make their way into the Anglo-Saxon cities, with London at the heart of it all. Life for the Anglo-Saxon inhabitants of London, however, was far from easy. The city was still at risk of attack from nearby tribes, and most of the population lived under the threat of raids or conflict. Pagan traditions coexisted with Christianity, and the early Anglo-Saxon period was marked by a blend of tribal customs and a Christianized society trying to forge a new path forward. No period in London's history was more tumultuous than the time of the Viking invasions, which started in the late 8th century. The Vikings, raiders from Scandinavia, began their onslaught on England's coasts in 793 AD, with their first raid on the Lindisfarne monastery. What followed was a series of attacks on Anglo-Saxon cities, including London. The Vikings came not just to raid but to conquer. Their methods were brutal: longboats that could navigate shallow rivers, swords, and axes capable of cutting through armor and bone, and warriors who had no hesitation in pillaging or killing. The Viking Age changed the course of English history, and London, with its strategic location on the Thames, was at the heart of the conflict. By 865 AD, the Vikings had begun to occupy East Anglia, York, and other parts of northern England, and their raids were becoming more frequent and more organized. In 1013 AD, King Sweyn Forkbeard of Denmark even declared himself King of England, marking a significant moment in Viking dominance over the Anglo-Saxons. At this time, the Anglo-Saxon king Athelred the Unready struggled to hold on to power, and his decision to pay the Vikings large sums of Danegeld, protection money, did little to stave off the inevitable. The Vikings weren't merely interested in gold, they sought to control the land, including London, which they saw as the seat of power. In 1016 AD, after a series of battles, the Vikings achieved their ultimate goal. Knut the Great, a Danish king, became the ruler of both England and Denmark, effectively making London a Viking city for nearly a generation. Under Knut, the city flourished, trade routes expanded, and London began to see the establishment of its first commercial hubs, drawing in traders from across Europe. Despite the domination of the Danish Vikings, the Anglo-Saxon heart of London never fully disappeared. The Viking presence had restructured the city, making it a melting pot of Scandinavian and Anglo-Saxon influences. For the people of London, this was a time of both oppression and opportunity. The city saw the rise of new structures, wooden fortifications and marketplaces, along with the increasing influence of the Norse gods and their priests. Under Viking rule, London was no longer the isolated settlement it had once been. The city began to see increased trade and growth in its port. The Vikings, who were skilled traders and seafarers, introduced new technologies and commercial practices that reshaped London's economic foundations. The Viking settlement also brought a new cultural and architectural influence to London. Danish longhouses were built alongside Anglo-Saxon homes, and the influence of the Viking style can still be seen in the structure of early London. The Viking Age marked the beginning of London's emergence as a key commercial city in the North Sea trade routes. Yet, the period of Viking dominance wasn't without strife. Internal tensions between the Anglo-Saxon population and the Viking settlers led to frequent clashes. This dynamic created a volatile environment where political power was constantly shifting, and violence was a part of everyday life for many Londoners. In the end, however, the Viking presence paved the way for the next stage of London's growth. In 1042 AD, after decades of Viking rule, the Anglo-Saxons reclaimed the throne of England with the coronation of Edward the Confessor, who would rule until his death in 1066 AD. London once again became a key seat of power, as Edward worked to re-establish Anglo-Saxon rule across England. However, London's history was far from stable, as the events of the Norman Conquest in 1066 would soon make clear. The year 1066 marked one of the most pivotal moments in English history, the Norman Conquest. This was not just a military victory, but a cultural and societal upheaval that would reshape London forever. Led by William the Conqueror, the Normans came to England with the aim of asserting control and creating a new dynasty. After defeating King Harold II at the Battle of Hastings, William began a methodical process of asserting his rule across England, and nowhere was this more important than in the city of London. By the time William the Conqueror came to London, it was a city with a long history of Anglo-Saxon and Viking influence. The Anglo-Saxon King Edward the Confessor had left his mark on the city, but it was under Norman rule that London underwent a radical transformation. William recognized the strategic importance of London. Located on the River Thames, it was both a trading hub and a key political center. With the Norman Conquest, William moved swiftly to reassert control over the city. The Anglo-Saxons who had lived in the city for generations now found themselves under Norman rule, and many were replaced by Norman officials who were tasked with managing the city. One of William's first actions was to establish Norman military presence in London, solidifying his control over this vital city. William ordered the construction of fortifications to secure London from potential uprisings. The most iconic of these fortifications was the Tower of London. Construction began in 1066, and the tower became both a symbol of Norman authority and a fortress used to control the city. This monumental structure would serve as the royal residence, a prison, and a symbol of conquest for centuries to come. The Tower of London, built on the banks of the Thames, was initially constructed as a white tower, a simple rectangular keep that would later become the heart of the Norman imperial presence in England. William's decision to build the tower was a clear statement of dominance over the Anglo-Saxon populace and a way to secure London's position as the heart of the Norman kingdom. As the tower rose, so too did the Norman influence in London. The Norman nobility began to replace the Anglo-Saxon elite, with French-speaking officials and military leaders taking positions of power. Anglo-Saxon nobility were often dispossessed of their land, while Norman lords were granted vast estates in and around London. The Anglo-Saxon aristocracy either fled or was displaced, and the social structure of the city was forever altered. In 1085, William ordered the Domesday Book, a comprehensive survey of England's lands, wealth, and resources. This project was designed to quantify the resources under Norman control, including landholdings, population, and income. For London, the Domesday Book was particularly significant. It recorded not just the city's physical landscape, but also the people who lived there, their wealth, and their status under Norman rule. The Domesday Book revealed the extent of Norman control in London. It was a valuable tool for the administration, helping William and his successors understand the political, economic, and military importance of various regions in the kingdom. London's commercial value and strategic location were duly noted, making it one of the key cities in the entire kingdom. The Domesday Book also helped solidify feudal relationships in London, as it recorded the transfer of land from Anglo-Saxon lords to Norman barons. The book outlined the duties of landholders, the taxes owed, and the local administration under Norman rule. The architectural landscape of London was also forever changed by the Norman Conquest. The Roman influence, with its focus on stone and brick construction, persisted in some parts of the city, but the Normans introduced their own unique style of architecture. The Norman Romanesque style, with its rounded arches, thick walls, and heavy stone structures, began to dominate the cityscape. The Tower of London was the most significant of these structures, but the Normans also built churches, castles, and fortifications that redefined the city's architecture. The Westminster Abbey, rebuilt in the Norman style, became the site of royal coronations, while St. Paul's Cathedral was reconstructed under Norman influence to replace the earlier Anglo-Saxon church. These stone buildings, constructed for both defense and religion, became symbols of Norman strength and stability. The Norman architecture in London created a lasting legacy that influenced the development of the city's buildings for centuries. Under Norman control, the social structure of London underwent dramatic change. The Anglo-Saxon system of landholding in society was replaced by the feudal system, in which the king owned all the land, and nobles were granted land in exchange for military service. The Norman feudal system allowed for a greater degree of central control, as the king could directly manage the land and resources of the kingdom through his appointed nobles. For the common people of London, life under the Normans was a mix of continuity and change. The majority of people in the city remained peasants or serfs, bound to the land and working under the feudal system. However, many Anglo-Saxons still lived and worked in the city, albeit under the subjugation of the Norman nobility. While life for commoners was difficult, the Norman period brought improvements in urban life. The Normans continued the Roman tradition of maintaining trade routes and marketplaces, ensuring that London remained a commercial hub. The city grew in population, and new infrastructure such as streets, bridges, and public buildings began to shape the future of London. The Norman conquest brought a significant cultural shift to London. Norman French became the language of the court, and the Anglo-Saxon language gradually gave way to Latin and French in legal and administrative matters. This change would have far-reaching consequences for the identity of London, as it became a cultural melting pot of Anglo-Saxon, Viking, and Norman influences. Norman rule also brought a renewed emphasis on religion, as the Catholic Church became more influential in the political and social life of London. The Church became a significant landowner, and its leaders played key roles in the governance of the city. Monasteries were established, and the clergy became a powerful force in the development of London. The Anglo-Saxon population had to adjust to the changes brought by the Norman rulers, but the city remained a center of commerce, religion, and political activity. Over time, the distinct Norman identity began to blend with the local Anglo-Saxon customs, forming the foundation of what would later become medieval London. By the end of the 11th century, London had transformed from a declining Roman outpost to a thriving medieval city under Norman rule. The Norman conquest had secured the city's position as the capital of England, and its significance as a political, economic, and cultural hub was cemented. The feudal system continued to shape the social and economic landscape of London, with the Norman nobility controlling vast estates and the Anglo-Saxon commoners working the land. The development of Norman architecture and the feudal system would lay the foundation for London's future as a medieval metropolis. The Norman period was a time of consolidation and reconstruction. The Tower of London stood as a symbol of Norman power, and London began to expand both in terms of population and economic influence. The city's strategic position along the Thames continued to make it a vital center for trade and commerce, while its growing political significance ensured its central role in the kingdom. By the end of the 11th century, the Norman conquest had reshaped London into a key city in England's political and cultural landscape. Under William the Conqueror and his successors, the city had become the heart of the English kingdom, its significance further cemented by the construction of the Tower of London, the fortifications, and the growing influence of the feudal system. But as time passed and the Norman rulers faded into history, London began to evolve once again, entering a new era where it would take on a more prominent role in the growing kingdom. The Plantagenet Dynasty, which began with Henry II in the 12th century, ushered in an era of growth, conflict, and transformation for London. It was during this period that the city would become a political center not just for England but for Europe as a whole. The events of these centuries would shape medieval London in profound ways, through architectural feats, shifting social structures, wars, and the rise of royal authority. When Henry II ascended to the throne in 1154, he inherited a kingdom that was already in a state of turmoil and transition. William the Conqueror's sons and grandsons had dealt with their own struggles to consolidate power, and the kingdom was fractured. Henry's reign marked the beginning of the Plantagenet Dynasty, which would rule England for several centuries. For London, the Plantagenets represented both a stabilizing force and an opportunity for expansion. Henry II's reign, which lasted from 1154 to 1189, was characterized by attempts to centralize power and reassert royal authority. London, once again, found itself at the center of this transformation. Henry's reign saw a revival of the monarchy, and the city became the administrative center for the growing English state. One of the most significant actions of Henry II was the strengthening of royal power, especially over the local barons and the church. In London, Henry II focused on rebuilding the royal court, establishing a more centralized government. The city became the hub for royal justice, as Henry implemented reforms to the legal system that solidified the power of the king over local rulers. One of his major achievements was the establishment of the common law, which gave rise to a new legal system that would later be used in much of the English-speaking world. During Henry II's rule, the city walls of London were reinforced, and a royal palace was built at Westminster, marking the city's growing importance as the political heart of England. The royal administration, including the King's Court, taxation systems, and legal reforms, all became more centralized in London. As the city grew in importance, its streets became more organized, and its role as a trade hub expanded, attracting merchants from across Europe. Henry II's son, Richard the Lionheart, ascended the throne in 1189. Richard's reign, however, was largely marked by his absence from England as he embarked on the Third Crusade. Despite his physical absence, Richard's influence on London was profound. London, now firmly established as the capital, continued to serve as the administrative center for the kingdom, with the royal court temporarily replaced by regents in the king's absence. Richard's legacy, however, lay more in the international recognition of London as a centralized monarchy. His absence in England also marked the beginning of the decline of royal authority, as various local nobles and church officials took advantage of his absence. But upon his return, Richard sought to reassert control, and London remained central to the feudal network that kept the kingdom's power intact. By the reign of John, the brother of Richard I, London had firmly established itself as the epicenter of political change. King John's reign, 1199 to 1216, is one of the most pivotal in English history. His inability to manage baronial discontent and his mishandling of the monarchy's financial policies led to the Magna Carta in 1215, a charter of liberties that curtailed the absolute power of the king and established certain rights for the barons. For London, the signing of the Magna Carta was a momentous event. London's citizens, many of whom had been forced to pay exorbitant taxes, played a significant role in the events leading up to the document's signing. The city's leaders had been instrumental in supporting the barons against King John, and as a result, the city gained greater autonomy, particularly in trade and self-governance. London was also granted the right to elect its own mayor, giving it more control over its own internal affairs. The Magna Carta marked a shift in the balance of power between the crown and the city, and it laid the groundwork for the development of English constitutional law. As London expanded during the Plantagenet period, its architectural landscape grew in complexity. The Norman style of architecture, characterized by its thick stone walls and round arches, evolved as new influences began to shape the city's skyline. By the time of Edward I's reign, 1272 to 1307, Gothic architecture began to take hold in London, with soaring cathedrals, churches, and abbeys transforming the skyline. Edward I was also instrumental in overseeing the construction of several monumental buildings, including the Westminster Hall, which would later become part of the Palace of Westminster. The construction of the Westminster Abbey, which had been started by Henry III in the 13th century, was another symbol of the growing importance of the church and the monarchy in medieval London. It became not only a place of worship but also the site of royal coronations, further solidifying London's role as the political centre of the kingdom. The streets of London also began to change during this period. Markets were established in new areas, with trade hubs emerging around the River Thames, which allowed goods to flow in and out of the city. The rise of marketplaces and guilds helped London's economy thrive during this period. The Hundred Years' War, 1337 to 1453, between England and France had a significant impact on London. As the war dragged on, London became more militarized and economically focused on providing supplies and services to the English armies. The war itself caused strain in the economy, but London's role as the country's central hub ensured its continued economic dominance. During this period, the city continued to grow as a trading center and a political capital, despite the challenges of the war. The construction of the Tower of London and the rise of the Guildhall as a symbol of local governance marked a new chapter in London's civic life. London was no longer just the seat of the royal court, it was also the center of popular politics, with common citizens gaining more influence in local affairs. The Black Death of the 14th century did cause devastation in London, decimating much of its population, but it also spurred economic change. As labor became scarce, workers demanded higher wages, and this shift in the social structure led to significant changes in how the city was governed. As the Middle Ages gave way to the Renaissance, London entered a new and transformative era, one that would change the course of both the city's future and England's place in the world. The Tudor Dynasty, beginning with Henry VII in 1485, brought a period of relative stability, growth, and political consolidation after the chaos of the Wars of the Roses. But more importantly, it was under the Tudors that London would evolve from a medieval city into a global metropolis, driven by royal patronage, economic expansion, and cultural renewal. During the Tudor period, London became the capital of a burgeoning empire, as the Tudor monarchs sought to extend their influence beyond the shores of Britain. From the Reformation of the Church to the dawn of the English Renaissance, this period reshaped the very fabric of life in the city. Tudor London was a city of contrasts, where the opulence of the monarchy and the wealth of trade coexisted with the grinding poverty of the common people. When Henry VII defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, he ended the Wars of the Roses and began the Tudor dynasty. Although Henry VII's reign was initially marked by caution and consolidation, his rule set the stage for a more prosperous and centralized England. London, as the capital, grew in both economic and political importance during his reign. Henry VII focused on rebuilding the country's economy after decades of warfare and instability. His efforts at trade expansion led to an increase in London's role as a central hub for international trade. He promoted English merchants and established diplomatic ties with other European powers, which laid the foundation for England's future economic prosperity. During Henry's reign, London's population grew steadily. The city, while still surrounded by its medieval walls, began to expand beyond its historical borders. New suburbs and districts emerged as wealthier citizens sought to build grand homes outside the overcrowded heart of the city. The rising merchant class also began to play a key role in the development of London's economy. Henry VII also supported the Tudor monarchy's centralized power, reducing the influence of the nobility and strengthening the role of Parliament. His reign established the crown's financial control, which would help finance future monarchs' endeavors, including military campaigns, naval expansion, and the building of royal palaces. Perhaps no Tudor monarch had a greater impact on London's development than Henry VIII. Taking the throne in 1509, Henry VIII's reign, which lasted until his death in 1547, saw London rise to unprecedented heights of influence and wealth. Henry VIII, driven by his desire for power and his vision for English sovereignty, presided over the English Renaissance in London, a time of great cultural and intellectual change. London became the focal point for humanist thought and artistic expression. The king's support of Italian Renaissance art, architecture, and culture brought new artistic trends to the English court and to the streets of London. It was also during Henry's reign that London saw the expansion of its theatres, particularly with the construction of the Globe Theatre and the rise of playwrights like William Shakespeare, who would make the city the birthplace of modern English theatre. Henry's reign also saw the rebuilding of key London landmarks. The Palace of Whitehall, which became the main residence of English kings, was expanded and enhanced. The Grand Hampton Court Palace was constructed, becoming one of the most magnificent royal residences in Europe. The grandeur of these royal palaces reflected the rising power and influence of the Tudor monarchy, centered in London. One of the most defining events during Henry VIII's reign was the English Reformation, which had profound consequences for London's religious and social fabric. In 1534, Henry broke from the Catholic Church and declared himself supreme head of the Church of England. This religious shift not only reshaped London's churches and monasteries but also brought about significant social and political changes. The dissolution of the monasteries, which took place between 1536 and 1541, led to the closure of hundreds of monasteries, convents, and abbeys in London and across England. This had profound effects on the poor, who had relied on the monasteries for charitable support. Many monastic properties in London were repurposed for secular use, such as the Palace of Westminster, or being turned into private estates for the rising Tudor nobility. The Reformation also spurred the spread of Protestantism in London, as the city became a major centre of Protestant thought. The English Bible was printed and distributed widely, and Protestant preachers began to spread their message throughout the city. Religious tensions often boiled over in London during Henry's reign, as Catholics and Protestants clashed over the king's religious reforms. After Henry VIII's death in 1547, his only son, Edward VI, ascended to the throne at the young age of 9. Edward VI's reign was marked by political instability and religious conflict. As a Protestant monarch, Edward continued the reforms set in motion by his father, pushing for further Protestant policies. The Church of England became more radically Protestant, with iconoclasm and the destruction of religious images and symbols in the city's churches. Edward's reign was short and plagued by economic instability. London streets were often filled with protests as food prices soared and the city's poor became restless. Religious persecution also intensified, as Catholics were executed for opposing the Protestant reforms. Though his reign was short, the cultural changes set in motion by the young king were significant. The rise of Puritanism and the spread of Protestant beliefs in London contributed to the city's growing reputation as a centre of religious reform in England. In 1553, after Edward VI's death, his Catholic half-sister Mary I took the throne. Mary, determined to return England to Catholicism, initiated a series of religious persecutions, often referred to as the Marian persecutions. During her reign, many Protestants were burned at the stake, creating a period of religious turmoil in London. This period, however, was relatively brief. Mary I died in 1558, and her Catholic reforms were reversed by her sister, Elizabeth I, who reinstated Protestantism as the state religion. Elizabeth I, who ruled from 1558 to 1603, is often regarded as one of England's greatest monarchs, and her reign is considered a golden age for London. Elizabeth's reign was marked by relative political stability, the growth of international trade, and the flourishing of art, literature, and science. Under Elizabeth, London transformed into a thriving commercial city, playing a central role in England's exploration of the New World. The Royal Navy grew in strength, and Sir Francis Drake and other explorers made significant voyages, establishing new trade routes to the Americas, Africa, and Asia. The Tudor economy was heavily based on international trade, and London's ports were critical for the kingdom's wealth. London's economy flourished during this period. The city became a major financial center, as the merchant class and guilds prospered. The rise of banking and insurance helped finance the growing demand for ships and exploration. London also grew in importance as a cultural center, particularly with the rise of the theatre. The Globe Theatre, opened in 1599, became the birthplace of Shakespearean drama, and London's theatrical life flourished, marking the beginning of the Elizabethan stage that would dominate world literature. One of the defining events of Elizabeth's reign was the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. This victory solidified England's power in the Atlantic and gave London a sense of national pride and confidence. The defeat of Spain's massive fleet marked the beginning of England's dominance as a maritime power, and London played a crucial role in this achievement. Despite the cultural and economic growth, Elizabethan London was still a city of stark contrasts. The wealthy elite lived in grand houses and were part of a courtly society, while the poor struggled to survive in crowded, unsanitary conditions. The plague and poverty continued to affect the city's population, which was growing rapidly. Criminality was common, and London's jails and workhouses were overflowing with the city's most destitute. Yet, the Elizabethan age is remembered for the arts, exploration, and a sense of national pride that defined the character of Tudor London. The city's prominence on the world stage only continued to rise, marking the beginning of a new age of influence and power. The Stuart period in England was one of immense change, political upheaval, and civil strife, but also one of cultural growth and the dawning of a modern era. The reigns of the Stuart monarchs, from James I to Charles II, would alter the very fabric of London, shaping it into the metropolis we recognize today. However, it was the English Civil War, a devastating conflict between the royalists and parliamentarians, that truly tested the strength and resilience of London, as the city became both a political and physical battleground for the future of England. In 1603, with the death of Elizabeth I, the Tudor dynasty came to an end, and the Stuart dynasty began its reign. The first Stuart king of England, James VI of Scotland, also known as James I of England, ascended to the throne. James, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, inherited not only the English throne but also that of Scotland, uniting the crowns of the two nations in a personal union, though the countries would remain politically distinct. James I's reign marked the beginning of a new era in England, but also a period of political tensions and religious strife. His attempt to rule with absolute authority clashed with England's growing parliamentary traditions, and his attempts to reconcile the divided Protestant factions in England were met with mixed success. The tensions in London, as the seat of power, were palpable, as Parliament and the King's authority began to struggle for supremacy. Although James I sought to be a strong monarch, his reign was characterized by political and religious tensions that would shape the future of London. One of the defining features of his reign was the increasing friction between Protestants and Catholics, which reached a head with the infamous Gunpowder Plot of 1605. The Gunpowder Plot, a failed attempt by a group of Catholic conspirators led by Guy Fawkes to blow up the Houses of Parliament and assassinate James I, was one of the most significant events of his reign. Although the plot was foiled, it created lasting fear and resentment between Catholics and Protestants, especially in London, the political heart of the nation. The city saw a rise in anti-Catholic sentiment, and harsh measures were enacted against Catholics, further solidifying the divide in religious beliefs across the country. Despite these challenges, London flourished under James I in many ways. His court was a center of artistic patronage, and the playwright William Shakespeare and other literary figures thrived during this period. The Jacobean era saw the construction of theatres such as the Globe Theatre, and London became a cultural hub for the rising English theatre. Yet, politically, the tensions between the monarchy and Parliament continued to escalate. When James I died in 1625, his son Charles I succeeded him on the throne. Charles I's reign, which lasted from 1625 to 1649, would be marked by absolute monarchy, which clashed severely with the growing power of Parliament and the City of London. Charles I believed in the divine right of kings, the idea that his power was granted by God, and that he was answerable only to God, not to his subjects or Parliament. This belief put him in direct conflict with the English Parliament, which had long been a key part of the country's political landscape. Charles's financial mismanagement and his attempts to rule without Parliament for 11 years, from 1629 to 1640, created a climate of tension, especially in London, where many of the mercantile class and wealthy citizens were dependent on Parliament's approval for taxation and trade laws. Charles I also antagonized the Puritans, a religious group that sought to further reform the Church of England, by imposing religious uniformity and enforcing his royal policies. This alienated many of London's Protestant population, particularly the growing Puritan faction, which had become a major force within the city. The situation reached a boiling point in 1640, when Charles I was forced to call the Long Parliament in order to raise money to fund his wars in Scotland. What followed was a series of confrontations between the king and Parliament, which demanded more influence over national affairs. The City of London, where many parliamentarians were based, played a central role in this growing conflict. The growing divide between royalists, those loyal to the king, and parliamentarians, those who sought more power for Parliament, ultimately led to the English Civil War in 1642. The City of London, a hub of wealth and political influence, became a focal point of the conflict. Charles I attempted to assert his control over London, but the city was overwhelmingly in favor of Parliament's cause. The English Civil War, 1642 to 1651, was a conflict that divided the nation, with the Royalists, supporting King Charles I, and the Parliamentarians, led by figures such as Oliver Cromwell, battling for control. London, as the political and economic heart of the nation, was a key battleground. London's importance during the war cannot be overstated. The city was a stronghold for the parliamentarians, providing them with both money and troops. Parliament's ability to control London was crucial to their success. Throughout the war, London remained a safe haven for those opposed to the king, and its wealth and strategic position on the River Thames made it a valuable asset to the parliamentarian cause. Despite its importance to Parliament, London was not immune to the ravages of war. The siege of London by royalist forces led to street fighting and the destruction of parts of the city. The conflict strained London's infrastructure, with tensions running high between the two factions. Yet, the city's role in the war ultimately determined the outcome. Parliamentary forces won significant victories, and London served as the heart of the new model army, which eventually defeated the Royalists. In 1649, after a long period of political and military upheaval, Charles I was captured and tried for treason. The execution of the king in Whitehall, on the grounds of his own palace, was a dramatic moment in English history, signaling the end of monarchy for the time being. The death of Charles I led to the abolition of the monarchy and the establishment of the Commonwealth of England under the leadership of Oliver Cromwell. London, once the seat of the monarchy, now became the capital of the Republic. Cromwell and the Puritans sought to reshape English society, focusing on religious reform, military discipline, and centralized power. London, the center of royalist activity during the war, now served as the epicenter of Republican governance. Despite the end of the monarchy, the absence of a centralized royal authority in London led to instability. The Commonwealth was marked by internal conflict and divisions among the leadership. Cromwell's Protectorate, 1653 to 1658, attempted to govern with a mixture of military force and authoritarian rule, but the idea of a republican England began to falter. In 1660, after Cromwell's death and the eventual collapse of the Commonwealth, the monarchy was restored with the return of Charles II, the son of Charles I. London, which had borne the scars of the Civil War and the Republican experiment, was reborn as the political and cultural capital of England. The return of Charles II to the throne was welcomed with great celebration in London. The city began to recover from the hardships of the Civil War and the plague, and under Charles II, it entered a new era of rebuilding. The Great Fire of London in 1666 would later devastate much of the city, but it would also provide the opportunity for major urban renewal. The rebuilding of London after the fire marked the beginning of a more modern cityscape, with stone buildings replacing the earlier timber structures. Charles II's reign also saw the rise of theatres, art, and literature in London. The city once again became a centre of cultural life, with the Royal Society promoting scientific advancement and the city's public life flourishing. As the 17th century drew to a close, London entered the 18th century, a period marked by immense change, expansion, and the rise of England as a dominant global power. The city, which had once been ravaged by war, plague, and fire, was now a symbol of prosperity, knowledge, and empire. In the span of just a century, London would evolve from a recovering city into the cultural, political, and economic heart of a growing British Empire. The 18th century in London was a time of profound transformation. The population surged, trade flourished, and the Age of Enlightenment brought with it new ideas about society, philosophy, and the role of government. The city's infrastructure expanded rapidly, and its importance in the world grew exponentially. London would become a magnet for scientists, philosophers, artists, and writers, cementing its place at the forefront of intellectual and cultural life in Europe. But the 18th century also brought challenges. The growth of the city was accompanied by poverty, crime, and the ongoing pressures of an industrializing economy. Yet, amidst these struggles, London managed to maintain its position as a city of grandeur and prestige, as well as a hub for imperial power. Following the restoration of Charles II in the mid-17th century, the 18th century in London saw political stability return under the reign of Queen Anne and the subsequent Hanoverian monarchy, particularly with George I ascending the throne in 1714. The Glorious Revolution of 1688, which had seen James II replaced by William of Orange and Mary, ushered in a new era of parliamentary supremacy, reducing the power of the monarchy and ensuring that the Parliament would take the lead in governing the country. London, as the seat of government, was at the heart of this political transformation. The Act of Union in 1707, which merged England and Scotland to form the Kingdom of Great Britain, created a new political dynamic for London. The capital was now the centre not only of English politics but also of a united kingdom that would soon become one of the most influential powers in the world. During the early 18th century, London's role as a political capital was reinforced by the growing importance of its parliament. The House of Commons and the House of Lords became increasingly powerful institutions, and the city became the centre of political discourse. London saw the emergence of political parties, newspapers, and a growing public sphere, as coffeehouses and public meetings became places for discussing ideas and the politics of the day. Perhaps no other era in London's history was as intellectually vibrant as the 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment. This period saw the rise of a new philosophical and scientific worldview that sought to place reason, empiricism, and human rights at the heart of political and social life. London was a hub for this intellectual movement, attracting some of the greatest minds in Europe. London became home to some of the most notable philosophers and thinkers of the Enlightenment. John Locke, the father of liberalism, laid the groundwork for constitutionalism and democracy, advocating for the natural rights of individuals and the importance of governmental consent. His ideas would become the foundation of modern political theory and would later influence the American Revolution. Isaac Newton, the renowned scientist, brought his groundbreaking work on gravity and motion to London, where his theories helped shape modern physics and mathematics. Newton's Principia Mathematica, published in 1687, laid the foundation for modern science and solidified London as a centre for scientific research. The Royal Society, established in 1660, became a focal point for scientific advancement in London, with scientific minds from across Europe congregating to discuss natural philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy. It was here that groundbreaking advancements in medicine, chemistry, and biology were made. In addition to political and scientific advancements, the 18th century was a period of literary flowering in London. Samuel Johnson, one of the most influential writers of the period, wrote his monumental Dictionary of the English Language, which helped standardize the English language. Alexander Pope's satirical verse and Jonathan Swift's biting satire in Gulliver's Travels helped to define the literary culture of the time. London became home to the coffeehouses, where writers, journalists, and intellectuals gathered to discuss the issues of the day. It was in these intellectual spaces that the modern press began to take shape. The proliferation of newspapers and periodicals gave rise to a more informed and politically engaged public, and literary salons became the heart of London's social life. As the 18th century progressed, London's role as the centre of the British Empire grew stronger. London was not only a political and intellectual hub, but also a thriving centre for global trade. The rise of the British East India Company and other trading ventures made London the gateway for goods from Africa, Asia, and the Americas. The city's position on the River Thames made it an ideal location for shipping, and by the early 18th century, London's docks were bustling with ships bringing in spices, textiles, tea, tobacco, and sugar from across the globe. The wealth generated by trade brought economic prosperity to the city and solidified London's place as the centre of the global marketplace. London's economy benefited immensely from the colonial expansion, with the profits from slavery, plantation agriculture, and the triangular trade flowing into the city. This influx of wealth led to the construction of grand townhouses, palaces, and public buildings, which further transformed the city's skyline. As London's population grew throughout the 18th century, so did its social and economic disparities. The city saw a significant increase in urbanization, with the population growing from about 500,000 in the early 1700s to over 1 million by the end of the century. The growth of the city, however, brought significant challenges. With the expansion of trade and the Industrial Revolution, London's middle class grew significantly. Merchants, bankers, lawyers, and traders began to prosper, building lavish homes and supporting the burgeoning cultural institutions. The merchant class played a key role in the expansion of commerce and the city's wealth. Despite the wealth generated by trade and industry, life for the poor and working class was harsh. London's streets were crowded with poor labourers, artisans, and servants, many of whom lived in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions. The Industrial Revolution created jobs, but also led to the rise of factories and workhouses, where the poor toiled for long hours under grueling conditions. The growth of slums and crime were significant challenges in London. The contrast between the luxury of the upper class and the poverty of the working class was stark. London's social divide continued to widen, leading to unrest and the early stirrings of social reform. The 18th century was a period of both prosperity and contradictions for London. As the city became the hub of the British Empire, it also became a symbol of the inequalities that existed within the empire. The Enlightenment brought about new ideas in politics, science, and culture, but these ideas often coexisted with the exploitation of colonies, the growth of industrialization, and the increasing wealth of the ruling classes. Despite these contradictions, the 18th century remains a defining period in the history of London. The intellectual, cultural, and economic forces of the time laid the foundation for the modern global city that London would become in the centuries to come. The 19th century was a time of incredible change, not just for London, but for the world. The Industrial Revolution swept across Britain, and London, as the heart of the British Empire, experienced a profound transformation. From a bustling, thriving cultural centre to an industrial powerhouse, London saw an explosion of growth, both physically and economically. The city's skyline, its population, and its infrastructure were all reshaped as factories, railways, and housing developments began to define the urban landscape. Yet, with this rapid growth came a set of challenges that would define the century. While the Industrial Revolution brought prosperity to some, it also brought significant social inequality, overcrowding, and a rise in poverty that would create tensions throughout the century. The working class in London lived in deplorable conditions, working long hours in the dangerous, growing industries of textiles, coal, and iron. London was both the birthplace of a new industrial age and a city rife with social unrest, a breeding ground for the reform movements that would rise in response to these conditions. The early 19th century began with the legacy of the Napoleonic Wars, 1803 to 1815, which had a lasting effect on London's economy and society. The wars drained the nation's finances and created a sense of national unity against external threats. During this period, London remained a military hub, with barracks, supply depots, and a constant flow of troops passing through the city. After the defeat of Napoleon Bonaparte and the conclusion of the wars, Britain entered a period of peace, and London began to prosper as a commercial and industrial hub. The city, already rich from its colonial possessions, became the focal point for the growing global trade network. London's merchants and financiers played a significant role in facilitating the flow of raw materials, manufactured goods, and capital throughout the empire. However, London's prosperity came at the expense of a growing underclass. The city's population exploded during the early part of the century, with immigrants, workers, and those fleeing the hardships of rural life flocking to the capital in search of opportunity. This rapid growth led to overcrowding, the expansion of slums, and the rise of poverty that would challenge the city's infrastructure. The Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries radically transformed London's landscape. The city, which had once been defined by its medieval streets and small-scale commerce, was now becoming a bustling metropolis defined by the steam-powered factories, railways, and industrial machinery that fueled Britain's rise to global dominance. London's economy was no longer based solely on trade and banking. The city now housed factories, manufacturing plants, and workshops that churned out goods for the empire. The rise of factories and industry brought wealth to London's merchant class but also had a profound impact on the city's working class. The textile industry was one of the first sectors to experience rapid growth, with large mills and factories being built on the outskirts of London, particularly in the areas of East End and Southwark. These factories were powered by steam engines, which revolutionized production and made London a center for industrial output. The construction of railways further connected London to the rest of Britain and the world. The London to Brighton Railway, opened in 1841, was one of the first major rail lines, providing a faster way to transport goods and people. This development facilitated not just industrial growth but also the spread of ideas, cultural exchange, and population movement. With the rise of manufacturing, London saw the growth of warehouses, shipyards, and docks along the River Thames. The Port of London became one of the busiest in the world, handling a growing volume of imports and exports. These ports facilitated the transportation of raw materials such as cotton, sugar, tobacco, and spices to feed the industrial machinery of London and the empire. While industry and commerce flourished, the rapid urbanization caused by the influx of people seeking jobs led to major challenges for London. The population grew from 1 million in 1800 to nearly 6.7 million by the century's end. This massive population growth created a strain on the city's infrastructure, leading to overcrowded slums, poor sanitation, and a general lack of public health facilities. The working conditions in factories were deplorable. Long hours, low wages, and dangerous working environments were the norm for the majority of London's industrial laborers. Children were often employed in factories and mines, where they worked long hours in dangerous conditions for pitiful wages. The widespread use of child labor, as well as the lack of workers' rights, sparked debates about the need for social reform. The rise of industrialization in London also brought significant changes to the urban environment. Traditional areas of the city began to be replaced by factories and warehouses, and many historic buildings were demolished to make way for the new industrial landscape. The transformation of the city's skyline was both a symbol of progress and a sign of the growing inequality between the wealthy elite and the working poor. As industrialization progressed, the stark contrast between the wealthy and the poor in London became more apparent. The growth of factories led to the expansion of the working class, while the elite grew richer. However, the harsh realities of working in factories, coupled with the lack of proper housing, sanitation, and health services, led to widespread social unrest. The Industrial Revolution also spurred the growth of the labor movement and calls for workers' rights. During the early 19th century, workers began organizing to demand better wages, shorter working hours, and improved conditions. The Chartist movement, which began in the 1830s, sought to expand suffrage and gain political rights for the working class. These movements brought attention to the social inequalities that were exacerbated by industrialization. In 1834, the Poor Law Amendment Act was passed, attempting to address the growing poverty in London by providing poor relief, but it was widely criticized for its harsh measures and forced workhouses. The need for social reform was evident, and many activists, such as Charles Dickens, highlighted the squalid conditions of London's slums in their works. By the late 19th century, significant reforms began to take place. The Factory Acts passed in the 1830s and 1840s sought to limit working hours and improve conditions for women and children in factories. The Public Health Act of 1848 aimed to address the issue of sanitation, and by the end of the century, the city had begun efforts to improve housing for the working class. Despite the challenges of poverty and industrialization, the 19th century was a time of immense growth for London on the global stage. London became the capital of the British Empire, and its influence reached every corner of the world. The city was a hub for trade, finance, and culture. The British Empire spanned the globe, and London was the nerve center of this vast empire. As the empire expanded, so did London's role as a financial capital. The Bank of England, established in 1694, became the heart of British finance. London Stock Exchange, founded in the early 19th century, became one of the most important financial institutions in the world, facilitating global trade and investment. The city's growth also meant that London's cultural life began to flourish. The construction of public museums, galleries, and theatres helped to solidify London's role as a cultural capital. The establishment of the Victoria and Albert Museum, the British Museum, and the National Gallery attracted intellectuals, tourists, and artists from around the world. By the end of the 19th century, London had transformed from a medieval city to the heart of the British Empire. The Industrial Revolution had reshaped the city's economy, and its role as a global trade hub and financial center was firmly established. However, the rise of industrialization brought significant social and economic challenges, from the exploitation of workers to the rise of poverty in the growing slums. Yet, the 19th century also laid the groundwork for the modern City of London. The rise of social reform, the construction of modern infrastructure, and the cultural renaissance of the Victorian era paved the way for the city to emerge as a center of both power and progress in the 20th century. As we transition into the next chapter of London's history, the legacy of the Industrial Revolution and the profound changes of the 19th century will continue to echo throughout the city's streets and buildings. The early 20th century was one of the most transformative periods in London's history. It was an era defined by both progress and catastrophe, a century in which the city would experience the horrors of two world wars, the growth of social movements, and the transformation of London into the modern metropolis we recognize today. The First World War, the Great Depression, the Second World War, and the post-war recovery all played pivotal roles in shaping London's social, political, and physical landscape. At the dawn of the 20th century, London was still the heart of the British Empire, a global city that had just witnessed the triumphs of Victorian Britain. But with the outbreak of war in 1914, everything changed. The Great War would see London thrown into conflict, as the city's infrastructure and people were tested like never before. At the turn of the 20th century, London was at the height of its Edwardian splendor. Under the reign of King Edward VII, London had embraced luxury, fashion, and elegance. The streets were lined with fine shops, and the upper class lived in grand Victorian mansions in places like Mayfair and Kensington. London was also home to the finest theatres and concert halls in Europe. The West End had solidified its place as a centre of theatre and performing arts, attracting artists, playwrights, and musicians from across the globe. J. M. Barrie, George Bernard Shaw, and Oscar Wilde were just a few of the prominent figures who made their mark on London's cultural scene. However, beneath the glamorous surface, the Edwardian era also revealed deep social divides. London's working class still lived in overcrowded slums, with inadequate housing, sanitation, and limited access to education. The stark contrast between the wealthy elite and the impoverished masses was a defining feature of London society, setting the stage for the social reforms that would follow in the years to come. When the First World War broke out in 1914, London was immediately thrown into the chaos of total war. As the capital of the British Empire, the city became the central hub for the war effort. The royal family and government relocated to Windsor, but London remained the seat of military command, intelligence, and industry. In the early days of the war, London streets were flooded with recruitment posters, and volunteers signed up in droves to fight on the Western Front. Young men left the city in the thousands, and the fabric of everyday life changed almost overnight. The war affected every aspect of London life, from the economy to the social structure. Bombing raids on the city began in 1915, with the Germans targeting London's industrial sites, railways, and shipping ports. The Zeppelin raids and later the more frequent air raids during World War I marked the first time London experienced attacks on its home soil. The sounds of air raid sirens became a constant feature, and the city adapted, building an extensive system of air raid shelters to protect civilians. The war brought both hardship and unity to London. The city saw a massive shift in gender roles, as women stepped into workforce positions traditionally held by men. As men went off to fight, women worked in factories, nursing, and other essential services, leading to a growing demand for women's rights and political representation. The end of the war in 1918 was followed by a wave of social and political change. The war had left deep scars on London, with poverty and unemployment on the rise. Many returned soldiers found themselves struggling to reintegrate into society, and the city's infrastructure was strained by the need to rebuild. The 1918 Representation of the People Act marked a significant moment in British politics. It granted women over the age of 30 the right to vote and gave working-class men universal suffrage. London, as the political heart of the nation, was at the forefront of this social transformation, with women's rights and social equality becoming pressing issues. The years between the wars were marked by social and economic turbulence. The Great Depression of the 1930s hit London hard, leading to widespread unemployment, particularly in the city's docklands and industrial areas. The unemployed formed part of the growing working-class movement, which began to demand better pay, working conditions, and housing. As the economy faltered, political extremism began to rise in the streets of London. Communist and fascist movements gained traction, particularly among the disenfranchised and those suffering from the economic downturn. In 1936, the Battle of Cable Street saw a clash between anti-fascist protesters and the British Union of Fascists, led by Oswald Mosley, who had staged a march through the East End of London. The protesters successfully forced Mosley's fascist supporters to retreat, showing the growing resistance to fascism in the city. The outbreak of World War II in 1939 marked the beginning of another period of crisis for London. This time, the blitzkrieg tactics of Nazi Germany brought a new wave of destruction to the city. Between 1940 and 1941, London endured a constant bombardment from the Luftwaffe. The Blitz, as it became known, led to the destruction of vast sections of the city, particularly in the East End and the City of London. Iconic landmarks like St. Paul's Cathedral survived the attacks, but many buildings, homes, and factories were reduced to rubble. Life in London during the Blitz was one of constant fear and uncertainty. The city's residents adapted to the constant threat of air raids, with blackouts enforced to prevent enemy bombers from finding their targets. Underground stations, such as Bethnal Green, became makeshift shelters, and Londoners would spend hours, even days, in the cramped and uncomfortable shelters during air raids. Despite the hardships, the spirit of London remained unbroken. The London Underground served as an escape and a lifeline for the population, and people continued to work in the factories, businesses, and services vital to the war effort. Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister, became a symbol of resilience and determination, delivering stirring speeches that bolstered national morale and the resolve to continue the fight against Nazi Germany. By the end of World War II, London lay in ruins. The city had been severely damaged, and the economic and social costs of the war were immense. The task of rebuilding London fell to the post-war government, and the process of regeneration began immediately after the war ended in 1945. One of the first priorities of the post-war government was housing. The war had left hundreds of thousands of people living in substandard conditions, and a housing shortage plagued the city. The New Towns Act of 1946 and subsequent policies aimed to build new homes in the suburbs and alleviate overcrowding in the city. London also saw the establishment of the National Health Service, NHS, in 1948, which provided free healthcare to all citizens. This was a revolutionary change for a city that had seen the working class struggle to afford medical care. The creation of the NHS helped cement London's role as the heart of the welfare state. After the war, London also saw the beginnings of a cultural renaissance. The rise of youth culture, the teddy boys, and the mod subculture in the late 1940s and 1950s reshaped London's social and cultural landscape. London became a centre for fashion, music, and art, with areas like Soho and Carnaby Street emerging as epicenters of trendy culture. The wind of change continued into the 1960s with the swinging London era, where the city became synonymous with the Cultural Revolution sweeping across Europe. London was the birthplace of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and many other musical legends. It became a focal point for the counterculture, with young people embracing new ideas, lifestyles, and political beliefs. As the world emerged from the devastation of World War II, London stood at the crossroads of history, its streets scarred by conflict, but its spirit unbroken. The 20th century had been an era of immense upheaval, yet the 21st century promised a new beginning. London, once the heart of a vast empire, was now transitioning into a global center for finance, culture, technology, and commerce. In this new chapter, the city would rebuild itself not only physically but also socially, economically, and politically. In the aftermath of the war, London's recovery began with a surge of optimism. The 1940s and 1950s marked a period of intense rebuilding, followed by the gradual modernization of the city throughout the 1960s and 1970s. The city's diversity, coupled with its status as the capital of Britain, made it a global metropolis that would soon be at the center of world-changing events. From the youth culture of the 1960s to its role in globalization, modern London has evolved into a city unlike any other, becoming a beacon of economic growth, innovation, and cultural dynamism. At the close of World War II, London was left devastated. Much of the city's infrastructure was in ruins, with neighborhoods such as the East End and South London suffering the most from bombings. Iconic landmarks, including Covent Garden, the Bank of England, and parts of the City of London, had been destroyed or severely damaged. Entire streets were wiped out, and thousands of homes had been lost. For many Londoners, the immediate post-war years were about survival, rebuilding, and finding hope in the midst of destruction. In 1945, just months after the war, Clement Attlee's Labour government came to power. The new government had ambitious plans to reshape the nation, focusing on social and economic reforms. One of the most significant achievements of the post-war government was the creation of the National Health Service, NHS, in 1948, which offered free healthcare to all citizens, marking a key moment in the history of social welfare in Britain. London, as the heart of the nation, saw its hospitals, clinics, and health systems benefit immensely from the introduction of universal healthcare. The Labour government also nationalised key industries, including coal, steel, and railways, which helped stabilise the economy and rebuild London's infrastructure. This period of social reform saw the beginning of modern housing schemes, the development of public transport, and the establishment of new town planning to house the growing population. As the 1950s gave way to the 1960s, London entered a new phase in its social and cultural development. The city became the epicenter of the counterculture movement, which championed free expression, personal liberation, and artistic experimentation. Swinging London became a global brand, and the city was flooded with young people, artists, musicians, and intellectuals who sought to break away from the conservative norms of previous generations. London's influence in the cultural realm exploded with the rise of the Beatles, Rolling Stones, and other iconic British invasion bands. The city's streets were filled with the energy of the rock and roll revolution, and districts like Soho and Carnaby Street became the heart of youth fashion and mod culture. Fashion designers like Mary Quant and Twiggy redefined style, creating an international trend that resonated across the world. The 1960s also saw the rise of London's film industry, with studios like Pinewood and Ealing producing internationally acclaimed movies that reflected the era's social upheaval. Directors like Alfred Hitchcock and David Lean captured the tensions and triumphs of London through cinema, further cementing the city's role as a cultural hub. Another key aspect of London's transformation during this period was the growing influence of its immigrant communities. Following the Commonwealth Immigration Act of 1962, a wave of migration from former British colonies brought new people, cultures, and traditions to the city. Communities from India, the Caribbean, Africa, and Pakistan began to make London their home, enriching the cultural tapestry of the city and changing its demographic makeup. London's diverse population became a hallmark of the city, with new restaurants, markets, and cultural institutions opening up to reflect this multicultural influx. The 1970s were a challenging period for London, as the city's post-war recovery began to stagnate. Economic recessions, strikes, and rising inflation created a period of social and economic turbulence. London's role as the capital of the British Empire waned, and the city faced competition from other global cities like New York and Tokyo. The 1970s also saw the rise of economic inequalities and unemployment, particularly among the city's working class. The industrial decline in the Docklands and East End meant that many workers found themselves unemployed or facing poor conditions. In response, unions became more vocal, and protests demanding better wages and working conditions were frequent. In 1979, Margaret Thatcher became the first female Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Her government's policies, commonly known as Thatcherism, focused on privatization, free market economics, and reducing the power of trade unions. While these policies transformed the British economy, they also led to significant social unrest, particularly in the inner-city areas of London. Thatcherism was met with resistance in the working-class neighbourhoods of London, and the city became a battleground for ideological conflict between the left-wing Labour Party and the right-wing Conservative government. Key moments such as the miners' strikes and the 1980s riots reflected the growing divisions between the working class and the elite, while gentrification began to reshape the physical and social landscape of London. By the 1990s, London had entered a period of profound globalization. The city began to position itself not just as the capital of Britain but as a global city, a financial powerhouse that played a crucial role in world markets. London had shed its industrial past and emerged as a leader in finance, technology, and cultural exports. The City of London, traditionally the heart of London's financial sector, became increasingly important as global financial markets began to intertwine. The London Stock Exchange rose to prominence, and the city was now home to some of the largest and most influential financial institutions in the world. The creation of Canary Wharf in the Docklands area further transformed the city into a modern, financial powerhouse, with gleaming skyscrapers replacing the old industrial sites. London also became a hub for multinational corporations and hedge funds, attracting talent and capital from across the globe. The city's financial strength allowed it to weather many of the storms in the global economy, including the 1997 Asian financial crisis and the 2008 global financial collapse. In addition to its economic success, London underwent a cultural renaissance during the early 21st century. The 2000s saw the rise of new cultural attractions, including art galleries, museums, and public spaces. The completion of the Tate Modern, housed in a former power station, symbolized London's shift from an industrial city to a cultural leader. The Millennium Dome, although initially controversial, was later reimagined as the site for the O2 Arena, becoming one of the most visited entertainment venues in the world. In 2012, London hosted the Summer Olympics, a testament to the city's global appeal and its ability to host international events. The Games were seen as a huge success, and the event gave the city a boost in terms of infrastructure, tourism, and global prestige. As London enters the 21st century, it stands as a global leader in multiple fields. It continues to be one of the world's most influential financial centers, a leader in technology innovation, a thriving cultural metropolis, and a diverse, multicultural city. London's reputation as a global city is only strengthened by its role as the focal point of the European Union, before Brexit, its arts and entertainment industry, and its place as the primary gateway for international travel. The city remains a magnet for immigrants, tourists, and businesses, with a rich history that continues to shape its future. However, issues such as housing affordability, income inequality, and immigration policy remain significant challenges for London as it continues to evolve. The dawn of the 21st century marked an era of profound change for London. Once the center of a global empire, London now stands as a global city, diverse, dynamic, and facing new challenges that will shape its future. From economic changes to social transformation, political upheaval, and the city's uncertain post-Brexit reality, London's identity is evolving in real time. The city's resilience is being tested, and it stands at a crossroads, balancing its legacy of power, culture, and innovation with the demands of an increasingly globalized and fractured world. The 21st century, while bringing great opportunities, has also exposed deep social divides, inequality, and political challenges. The city's transformation is driven by the pressures of immigration, gentrification, and the shifting dynamics of a world no longer defined solely by empire but by a growing complexity of global politics and economics. In the early years of the 21st century, London experienced both economic prosperity and social divisions. The dot-com boom, the rise of global finance, and the opening of new markets helped propel London to the forefront of the world's financial hubs. Yet, beneath the surface of rapid development, there were growing concerns about the city's ability to maintain its identity in a changing world. At the turn of the 21st century, London was firmly positioned as a financial capital. The city, already home to some of the world's largest financial institutions, solidified its status as a center for global finance, attracting top talent from all over the world. The City of London and the Canary Wharf district became synonymous with international finance, housing global corporations, banks, and financial firms. The rise of the European Union and the globalization of finance ensured that London would remain an economic powerhouse for years to come. However, London's position as a financial hub also highlighted the growing gap between the city's elite and its working class. The high salaries and immense wealth of the financial elite contrasted sharply with the increasing poverty and social inequality that many Londoners faced. While the city thrived in some areas, large swathes of the population continued to live in poverty, with housing prices soaring beyond the reach of most. Perhaps the most defining political event in modern London's history was the decision to leave the European Union, a momentous vote known as Brexit. The 2016 Brexit referendum revealed deep divides within the country, and London, a city that had long prided itself on being a global city and an international hub, found itself at the epicenter of the debate. The majority of Londoners voted to remain in the EU, but the rest of the country voted to leave, creating a political chasm that has yet to be bridged. Post-Brexit, London's political and economic landscape has been shaped by the uncertainty surrounding the city's role within the United Kingdom and its relationship with the European Union. As the UK negotiates trade deals, borders, and immigration policies, London's international status has been questioned. The city, traditionally seen as a gateway to Europe, must now navigate a future outside the EU. One of the most significant impacts of Brexit on London has been its relationship with immigration. London has long been a city shaped by its immigrant communities, and immigration has been a driving force behind the city's cultural diversity and economic prosperity. Post-Brexit, however, the UK's immigration policies have become stricter, limiting the flow of workers from the EU and affecting London's labour market, particularly in areas like construction, healthcare, and hospitality. The Brexit vote also fueled a growing nationalist sentiment within the UK, one that contrasts sharply with London's more globalist and cosmopolitan outlook. This tension between globalism and nationalism has led to a sense of political alienation within the city, as many Londoners feel increasingly distanced from the rest of the country. While London's economy continued to grow, the city was also grappling with the consequences of rapid gentrification and a housing crisis that has left many behind. London's historical working-class neighborhoods have undergone significant transformation over the past 2 decades. In areas like Shoreditch, Brixton, and the East End, new developments and rising property prices have pushed out long-time residents, replacing once vibrant communities with luxury apartments, designer shops, and high-end restaurants. The growing housing crisis in London has been driven by a combination of factors. A lack of affordable housing has led to many Londoners being pushed further out of the city or forced to live in overcrowded conditions. Renting has become increasingly unaffordable for young professionals and families, while homeownership remains out of reach for much of the city's population. As prices continue to soar, London risks losing its diversity and becoming a city only for the wealthy elite. In addition, the rise of short-term rentals through services like Airbnb has exacerbated the housing shortage, as property owners turn their homes into tourist accommodations rather than long-term rentals for local residents. The rise of gentrification in the city has resulted in an ever-widening gap between the wealthy and the poor. While central areas of London experience luxury living, the outer boroughs struggle with poverty, unemployment, and a lack of social services. The influx of global capital has led to the creation of exclusive neighborhoods and high-end shopping districts, but it has also created widespread displacement and social inequality. This divide has become a focal point for political and social movements in the city. Activists and social justice groups continue to fight for better housing, more affordable rents, and a fairer distribution of wealth in the city. In recent years, there has been growing pressure on the government to address the housing crisis, with calls for increased investment in social housing and measures to curb speculative real estate practices. Despite the political and social challenges, London has maintained its status as a global cultural powerhouse. The city continues to attract creative talent from across the world, from fashion designers and musicians to writers, artists, and filmmakers. London's diversity has always been its strength, and its multicultural identity is now celebrated in every corner of the city. London has become a leader in the creative industries, with its influence extending into fashion, film, music, and arts. Areas like Shoreditch and Hackney have become known for their vibrant art scenes and street art, while the city's West End remains a global centre for theatre. In addition, London's film industry has continued to thrive, with iconic venues like the BFI South Bank and the Royal Opera House serving as hubs for international cinema and performing arts. The city has also embraced the digital age, with tech startups and entrepreneurial initiatives sprouting up in areas like East London. London has become one of the leading cities in the tech sector, with initiatives like Silicon Roundabout in Shoreditch attracting global investors and entrepreneurs. London's music scene has continued to evolve throughout the 21st century. It remains the birthplace of many iconic bands and artists, such as Adele, Stormzy, the XX, and Dua Lipa. The city's diverse population has contributed to the growth of genres ranging from indie rock and grime to electronic dance music and classical music. The global music industry continues to look to London for innovation, and the city's iconic music venues, such as the O2 Arena and Royal Albert Hall, attract musicians and fans from around the world. As London continues to evolve, it faces critical challenges. The post-Brexit era presents both opportunities and uncertainties, and the city must navigate complex questions of its identity in a globalized world. While London has always been a city that thrives on change, its future will depend on how it addresses the issues of inequality, housing, and economic diversification. London's future will also be shaped by its role as a global city, balancing its economic power with its responsibility to its diverse population. As the city continues to grow, its ability to foster inclusivity, creativity, and economic opportunity will determine whether it remains a beacon for the world or becomes a divided metropolis. London, a city renowned for its rich cultural history, has long been a global leader in art, fashion, theatre, music, and literature. From Shakespeare's Globe Theatre to the cutting-edge art installations in East London, the city's cultural vibrancy has always been a reflection of its diversity and dynamic creativity. As the world enters the 21st century, London's cultural landscape continues to evolve, embracing new technological innovations, creative industries, and inclusive movements that shape its identity in the global arena. The future of London lies in its ability to preserve its cultural heritage while integrating the latest in digital innovation and modern urban planning. As the city moves into this new era, it faces exciting opportunities to redefine itself as not just a financial capital, but as a cultural beacon and a hub of technological advancement. This segment explores how London is poised to reshape its cultural scene, embrace digital transformation, and lead the world in the development of smart cities. London has always been a cultural powerhouse, attracting creative minds from around the world. From the West End theatres to the Tate Modern, the city's commitment to culture is undeniable. But what will the cultural landscape of London look like in the coming decades, and how will it adapt to the challenges of the future? London's cultural diversity is one of the key factors driving its creative industries forward. The city is a melting pot of cultures, languages, and traditions, which provides a rich environment for artistic collaboration and innovation. As global migration continues to shape the population, London's artistic community becomes increasingly inclusive, embracing new ideas, genres, and voices from around the world. In the future, London's cultural institutions will continue to evolve to reflect this diversity. Museums, theatres, and galleries are expanding their collections and programming to showcase the global influence on London's artistic scene. The city's cultural spaces will continue to be places of inclusivity, where artists from different backgrounds can come together to create and inspire. London has long been known as the global centre for theatre. From Shakespeare's Globe to the National Theatre, the city's legacy in the performing arts is unrivaled. The future of London's theatre scene looks equally vibrant, with an emphasis on diversity, inclusivity, and technological innovation. Digital theatre is emerging as a significant trend, combining traditional stagecraft with virtual reality, VR, augmented reality, AR, and interactive media. The future of theatre in London will see an increased integration of immersive experiences, where audiences can interact with performers and digital projections in real time. Companies such as Punchdrunk have already pioneered immersive performances, and this trend will only grow, pushing the boundaries of what a theatre experience can be. The rise of public art and urban installations will play a key role in the future of London's visual arts scene. Areas like Shoreditch and South Bank are already home to cutting-edge street art, murals, and temporary installations that transform the urban environment into a living canvas. London will continue to evolve as a city of artistic expression, where public art becomes an integral part of the city's identity. Innovations in digital art will further shape this landscape. London's museums and galleries are incorporating interactive exhibits, digital projections, and artificial intelligence, AI, to create new forms of art. The Saatchi Gallery, Tate Modern, and Victoria and Albert Museum are already embracing these changes, blending traditional art forms with modern technology to engage visitors in new ways. London is already recognized as one of the world's leading tech hubs, and the future promises even greater innovation. The city is home to some of the world's top tech companies, and its proximity to financial districts such as Canary Wharf and the City of London has positioned it as a leader in fintech, AI, and big data. London is embracing the concept of the smart city, where digital technology is integrated into every aspect of urban life. This transformation includes the implementation of sensors, data analytics, and digital platforms that improve everything from transportation and healthcare to energy management and waste reduction. London's Smart City initiatives focus on creating a more efficient, connected, and sustainable urban environment. 5G technology is set to revolutionize the city's communication networks, enabling faster data transmission and more efficient digital infrastructure. This will allow for real-time traffic management, smart grids for energy, and the development of autonomous vehicles that could change the face of transportation in the city. One of the most exciting developments in London's smart city strategy is the integration of AI in public services. London's healthcare system, transportation network, and policing are already making use of AI-driven solutions to improve efficiency and service delivery. In the future, AI-powered public transport systems, smart housing, and data-driven urban planning will redefine how Londoners interact with their environment. East London's Tech City, often referred to as Silicon Roundabout, has quickly become one of the leading startup hubs in the world. With over 3,000 tech companies in the area, East London is the heart of the city's digital revolution. As the digital economy continues to expand, Silicon Roundabout will play an increasingly central role in shaping the future of the city's economy and global standing. The future of London's tech scene lies in its ability to foster innovation, support entrepreneurship, and integrate new technologies into everyday life. London's startup culture is thriving, with funding from investors, incubators, and government programs fueling growth in AI, blockchain, robotics, and big data industries. London's future as a digital arts hub is just as exciting. The city's creative industries are merging with technology to produce interactive media, virtual reality exhibits, and augmented reality experiences. London's galleries and museums are embracing new forms of digital art, incorporating cutting-edge software, virtual installations, and interactive design to engage a new generation of visitors. Additionally, London's music scene is undergoing a digital revolution, with new technologies such as streaming services, AI-composed music, and virtual concerts making the music industry more accessible than ever. The integration of AI-driven music creation and smart sound systems in venues will continue to shape London's position as a global center of musical innovation. As London continues to evolve, its physical infrastructure must adapt to the growing demands of a modern, sustainable city. The future of London's urban planning will focus on creating livable, inclusive, and environmentally friendly spaces for all residents. One of the biggest challenges London faces in the 21st century is the growing housing crisis. While the city has long been a beacon of economic prosperity, the rise in property prices has pushed many working-class residents out of central areas. The impact of gentrification has been felt particularly in neighborhoods like Hackney, Islington, and Brixton, where the local population has been displaced by the arrival of high-income residents. The future of London will depend on its ability to address this issue. Efforts to increase affordable housing and social housing are vital for the city's growth. Additionally, new urban developments should include mixed-use spaces that allow for both residential and commercial use, creating neighborhoods where people from diverse economic backgrounds can live and work together. As London continues to grow, the integration of green spaces and environmentally sustainable practices will be central to its transformation. Future urban developments will focus on creating green buildings, eco-friendly transport networks, and public parks that provide not only aesthetic value but also ecological benefits. The city's plans for green roofs, urban farming, and the expansion of green corridors will help to mitigate the effects of urban sprawl and climate change. London's growing commitment to sustainable architecture and eco-friendly designs will ensure that the city becomes a global leader in green urbanism. This includes innovations in energy-efficient buildings, smart grids, and renewable energy sources to reduce the city's carbon footprint and promote a more sustainable way of living. London's future is both exciting and challenging. The city stands at the crossroads of the past, present, and future, and its ability to evolve will define its success in the coming decades. As London embraces technological innovation, sustainability, and cultural transformation, it will continue to serve as a model for other global cities striving for balance in the modern world. The rise of digital culture, smart technologies, and eco-friendly design will shape a new era for London, one where creativity and innovation thrive alongside social justice and environmental responsibility. London will continue to be a city of opportunity, a place where diversity is celebrated, and where the future is as bright as its past. As the city moves forward, London remains a beacon for those who seek a better future, one that values creativity, innovation, sustainability, and the power of collaboration. London has long stood as one of the world's most influential cities, its legacy steeped in centuries of global trade, finance, and culture. The city's position as a global economic center has only grown in the modern era, with London playing a pivotal role in the global economy. From its role as the heart of British financial markets to its global political influence, London continues to shape the international landscape. But as the world faces new challenges, from Brexit and economic inequality to digital transformation and climate change, London must adapt and reinvent itself to remain a relevant, thriving metropolis. This segment explores London's role in the global economy, its strategic position in international relations, and how it will evolve in the face of an ever-changing world. We will also look at how post-Brexit realities are reshaping the city's role in global trade, finance, and foreign policy. For centuries, London has been at the heart of international commerce and trade. From its historic role as the main trading hub of the British Empire to its modern-day position as one of the leading financial centres in the world, London's economic strength lies in its ability to adapt to changing global forces. Its vast infrastructure, thriving industries, and diverse economy provide it with the resilience to navigate the challenges of the global market. London is one of the world's leading financial capitals, rivaled only by cities like New York, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. The city is home to the London Stock Exchange, LSE, one of the oldest and most influential exchanges in the world, and a range of leading financial institutions such as HSBC, Barclays, and Standard Chartered. London remains a global centre for banking, investment, insurance, and fintech, sectors that contribute massively to the UK's GDP. However, since the UK's vote to leave the European Union, Brexit, there has been a shift in how London's financial sector operates within the global economy. While London remains the UK's financial centre, Brexit has forced the city to renegotiate its relationship with Europe. With passporting rights, which allowed financial institutions based in the UK to operate throughout the EU, gone, London's financial institutions have had to develop new strategies to maintain access to EU markets. The uncertainty caused by Brexit has had significant effects on London's economy, especially in the financial sector. Many companies, particularly in the financial services and banking industries, have begun relocating parts of their operations to cities like Dublin, Frankfurt, and Paris in response to the loss of the single market access. However, London's financial dominance remains largely intact due to its deep pools of capital, talented workforce, and long-standing role as a global hub. Moreover, Brexit has opened up new opportunities for London to renegotiate its trade agreements and become a key player in emerging markets outside of Europe. While the shift may be challenging, it also allows London to redefine its place on the global stage, focusing on strengthening ties with the US, Asia, and the Commonwealth. London's geographic location and its port, London Gateway, continue to make it a crucial hub for global trade. London is the primary gateway to Britain's global trade networks, and its vast transport infrastructure connects the city to the rest of the world. The River Thames remains one of the busiest waterways for goods, and London's airports, especially Heathrow, are some of the busiest in the world. One of the most significant changes since Brexit has been the UK's ability to independently negotiate trade deals. London, as the capital, plays a central role in representing the UK in international diplomacy and trade negotiations. With Brexit severing the UK's formal ties with the EU, London has looked to establish new trade agreements with countries such as the United States, Canada, Japan, and key Commonwealth nations. The city's role in global trade extends beyond the financial markets. London's ports and transportation networks make it an ideal gateway for imports and exports to and from Asia, Africa, the Americas, and the Middle East. These global trade networks also tie into the city's industrial sectors, including technology, manufacturing, and logistics. London is poised to capitalize on this new landscape of global trade, leveraging its international connections, diverse industries, and established business networks. Technology has become one of the most significant drivers of London's economic growth. As the UK's largest tech hub, London boasts a thriving startup ecosystem, with companies in the fields of artificial intelligence, blockchain, fintech, and biotech leading the way. The city's thriving Silicon Roundabout in East London is home to thousands of technology companies, ranging from fintech giants like TransferWise to cutting-edge startups in AI and robotics. London has also embraced digital innovation in traditional sectors like banking, insurance, and legal services. The city is transforming into a digital economy that not only competes with other global financial hubs but also leads in emerging technologies. The financial services industry is particularly active in embracing fintech innovation, and London continues to attract investors and entrepreneurs eager to tap into its vast digital infrastructure. London's status as a global city extends beyond its economic influence. The city is also home to numerous international organizations, diplomatic missions, and foreign embassies, making it an essential player in international relations. The United Nations and World Trade Organization regularly convene in London, and the city serves as a hub for international diplomacy. In addition to being the capital of the UK, London plays a crucial role in shaping international affairs. The city is a center for political dialogue, peace talks, and global decision-making. London hosts numerous international summits, where world leaders, policymakers, and diplomats gather to discuss global issues such as trade, security, climate change, and human rights. Despite the uncertainty surrounding Brexit, London remains a major global player in political discourse, especially as the UK focuses on forging new partnerships beyond Europe. The city's continued importance as a diplomatic center will only increase as the world faces new global challenges, from the climate crisis to international security concerns. Post-Brexit, London has emerged as a key focal point for the UK's foreign policy. While its relationship with the EU has changed, London's role in global diplomacy remains strong. The city is positioned to play a leading role in international trade negotiations, as well as contributing to climate agreements, global health initiatives, and the United Nations. The political and diplomatic role of London will continue to evolve, with new international agreements and partnerships expected in the wake of Brexit. London's long-standing ties to the Commonwealth will be especially important, as the UK looks to build stronger economic and political relationships with its former colonies. London is facing numerous challenges as it navigates a rapidly changing world. The city must balance the demands of economic growth and social equity, while also addressing climate change, immigration, and urbanization. London's future will depend on its ability to adapt to the shifting realities of a globalized economy and an increasingly interconnected world. One of the most significant challenges, and opportunities, for London is the transition to a green economy. As the city moves towards its goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2050, it must lead by example in climate action and environmental innovation. London has already made strides in reducing carbon emissions, promoting sustainable transportation, and investing in green energy sources. The city's role as a global financial center gives it the opportunity to invest heavily in clean technologies, green infrastructure, and climate-conscious industries. London could become a world leader in the emerging green economy, creating jobs and fostering innovation while addressing the global need for sustainability. As London enters the second half of the 21st century, it will continue to navigate the complex forces of globalization, technology, and politics. The city's ability to remain inclusive, diverse, and resilient will shape its success as a global metropolis. London must continue to adapt to changing global dynamics, ensuring that it remains competitive, innovative, and sustainable. From digital transformation to economic diversification, London's future will be one of opportunity, growth, and global leadership. As we conclude this exploration of London's future, we see a city poised at the crossroads of history and progress. London's role as a global city has been cemented over centuries, but the challenges of the 21st century demand that it continue to adapt and innovate. The city stands as a symbol of resilience, diversity, and transformation, a place where new ideas take root and global forces collide. From its position as a financial powerhouse to its pivotal role in international relations, London continues to evolve. Post-Brexit, the city faces the dual challenge of maintaining its economic strength while redefining its place in the world. But with its unmatched creativity, resilience, and capacity for reinvention, London is set to remain a beacon of global influence. In the coming years, London's role as an economic leader, diplomatic center, and cultural beacon will continue to grow, fueled by technological innovation, green initiatives, and its diverse, entrepreneurial spirit. London's commitment to being an inclusive, sustainable city will guide its future as it meets the challenges of climate change, social equity, and global competition. The future of London is one of opportunity, adaptability, and growth. As a city that thrives on change, London's journey into the next century will undoubtedly be marked by challenges, but it will also be defined by its unshakable ambition to remain at the forefront of the global stage. So, as we look ahead, we ask, how will London's story continue to unfold? What innovations will shape its future? And how will the city that has long defined the world's economic, political, and cultural landscapes continue to inspire the future? We will have to wait and see. But one thing is for certain, London's influence on the world is far from over. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into London's future, be sure to like this video and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the city's evolving role in the global economy, and how you see London adapting to the challenges ahead. Where do you think London is headed in the coming decades? How do you think the city can continue to balance its historical significance with the demands of a rapidly changing world? And, as always, let us know from where you're listening tonight. What time is it for you? It's fascinating to see how far-reaching our conversations can be, whether you're tuning in from London, New York, Tokyo, or beyond. Feel free to leave your comments and share your thoughts. We love hearing from you. Thank you for joining us on this journey through London's history and future. Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for our next video, where we'll continue exploring the world's most iconic cities and their roles in shaping our collective future. Until next time, stay curious, and keep exploring.